Welcome to Resilience Unravelled. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Thackeray. This podcast is a result of my fascination with health issues, resilience, performance, mental health, accountability and critical thinking, along with many of the other obsessions I bump into in my life. I spend my time working with highly successful teams, organisations and people, and this podcast introduces their remarkable stories, as well as my synthesis of the key issues, tips and strategies to thrive in life. If you find this podcast useful, you can also find other information at qedod.com or russellthackeray.com. Stay tuned to the end for details of how to order a free ebook. Enjoy the podcast. So today I'm talking to Tracey McAtamney. Hi Tracey.
Hi there. Nice to speak to you, Russell.
And you. I know we've had some fun and games trying to arrange this, so it's really great that we've managed to hook up at last. And thank you for spending some time with us to talk about both your book and a really fascinating subject.
Yes, well, it basically is resilience, and I think my book it's something that is really what happened 15 years ago, but it's only now I feel that I can talk about it and that it can benefit other people.
Fantastic. So, but the first thing I noticed is that you've got a British accent, which is quite nice for my audience. So tell me more about where you are today.
Okay, so I'm in Balsall Common, which is not far from Stratford-upon-Avon.
Oh, very posh.
Probably about 15 minutes away, and I'm looking out. I'm in my office and looking out over a lovely green garden at the moment.
Very good. Well, it might be underwater in a few minutes because apparently we've got flash floods on the way. So good luck with that.
Okay, where are you exactly?
I'm near Southampton.
Oh right, okay.
So we might soon both be submerged.
Yeah. They might be heading my way then.
Yeah. Now, I'm very taken by the sort of introduction to your book, and it starts by saying, how do you tell a 7-year-old that his daddy is never coming home? And I think that's, I read that and went, wow. I mean, that's quite a question. And actually, how on earth do you do that? So take us back all those years ago, Tracy, and tell us what was going on.
So 15 years ago, my husband Tony, who was a solicitor, and he was away playing golf for the Law Society in Spain. The reason we were not there as a family was because my son, who was 15, was doing his final exam, and he was due to go away with his friends the following day. So life was normal for us. I was helping run the practice, have a 7-year-old. Everything was going well. So 1 o'clock in the morning, I receive a phone call. There's no alarm bells, there's no police sirens, it's just a phone call. And for some reason, the man that called me is called Brian, and I didn't know him very well, but I knew he was with my husband. And he just said my name. He just said Tracey. And to that response, I just said, he's dead, isn't he? Wow. I have no reason why I said that. It just came out, and 15 years ago, people really didn't use mobile phones. I had one, but so I think it was the fact my mobile phone had gone at that time in the morning. But sleeping in the bed next to me was my 7-year-old, because he always said, when Daddy goes away, I'm going to sleep with Mummy. So and it was a little bit of a joke, and I had to get myself out of the room to make the phone call back to Spain and find out the details. But immediately, the shock of the call, I couldn't breathe. I actually felt like I'd been punched in the chest. And I think it was automatically, how am I going to tell my boys, and in particular, how I'm going to tell my 7-year-old? And
that's interesting, isn't it? Because they often talk about the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross grief model, and the first stage is shock, isn't it? Yeah. And you describe that really. It's a very interesting way you describe that. It's really powerful. But it's interesting that you were very practical in the next step. So, and I guess you had no choice other to be practical, did you?
Well, I didn't have a choice, and I think that's what I knew, that I had no choices other than I had to tell the boys, and I had to tell them straight away. Well, my older son was actually packing his suitcase with his friend in the next bedroom, which was really sad. They were still chatting at 1 a.m, and I had to break the news to him. And really, I think I just babbled it out. It came out of my mouth. There was no other way to tell him, and he was fantastic. He just, we just hugged, and his friend, I think his friend was the one that was more distressed than both of us. And it was just this surreal situation. The other thing was my mum at that point we have a granny flat attached to the house, and my mum lived in the granny flat. So I knew she was the next person I had to wake up and inform. And the sad thing about that is that when I knocked the door and I didn't want to frighten her. Obviously, she was a lady in her 70s. And she, when I told her, she just burst into tears, which was not something I expected, and I'll explain that a little bit further. When I was 7, my own father died. He fell down the stairs in an accident and broke his neck. So my mum had been left with 2 daughters, one of 7, which was myself, and my sister, who was 10. So my mum had been through it, and for me, I'd never seen my mum cry. My mum would always, you put your lipstick on, it will be fine, and she wasn't. I think it was all too much for her, and it was not the response I expected. So I knew immediately I was in trouble. If my mum had fallen apart, then I knew I now had to be the strong one.
And that must be, the echo from your mum must have been horrific, wasn't it? And I guess interesting as well, the difference in the generations about.
Yes.
The sort of dealing with these things. Very much in the modern day thing now is, we talk about our feelings and we sit around and such like. And I'm guessing for her generation, it was very much, would just get on with it.
It was. And I think I was able to draw on some of those things. Was that I remembered as a 7-year-old that my mum hadn't told me an awful lot. I didn't really even know my dad had died. I remember there being a coffin, and I can remember her squeezing my hand, and I didn't really understand anything about the funeral. And I just remember being frightened. And so I made a conscious decision almost immediately that night that things had to be different for Oliver in particular, that was 7, that he needed more information. I needed to deal with it differently. Having said that, my mum was a fantastic mother. And as I say, she brought us up to be, she protected us with her lives and with her life, and we were her priority. But I just think it was all too much when it happened again, and it was out of her control this time. But I was very lucky because she was here and she was at the house, so she was there as a support sort of ongoing. So going back to then Oliver, we're still only talking 2 in the morning. I'm ringing friends, ringing people for support really, and people arrive at the house, and the local priest arrived, and there's prayers being said. It's very, very surreal. And then I decided to walk. I decided that the only thing I could do was walk. And a friend of mine walked with me for miles. We walked until it started to get light. And it was all with this awful dread. It was this awful dread of what I had to do. And I really, really didn't know how I was going to tell Oliver. But we got back, and it was suddenly the sunlight was there, and I didn't feel any better. I had thought I might feel better when it was light, but I didn't. And so as I went up the stairs, everybody was waiting in silence downstairs to see what was going to happen. And he was extremely sweet. He looked at me, and you could see his face quiver because he knew immediately something was wrong. And I sat on the bed, and bless him, he held his hands over my eyes, and he just said, "Don't cry, mummy, don't cry." They were his words, and I knew immediately that if that was the only thing I could do for him, yes, that's what I would do. And then suddenly, so I just held his hands, and I just, thankfully, we were Catholic, and we do go to church, and Tony in particular was a strong Catholic, and he'd often said prayers at night with Oliver, and so I was able to do. Daddy's not going to come back. Daddy's gone to heaven, and it's a very difficult thing to say. Some people might say it's a wrong thing, but at the time I couldn't think of anything else to say other than, he's gone away. He didn't want to leave us, but he's had to. He's got work to do, in heaven, and the things that just came out of my mouth really. And I said, but if we look out at the stars, we'll be able to see Daddy, and he was silent for a little while, and then his little face was quivering, but there was no tears, and he just looked at me and he said, "Okay," and he said, "Mummy, do I have to go to school today?" And I went, "No, Oliver, no, you don't, sweetheart, no school today." And then, "Can I go downstairs?" So I picked him up, and he sort of said, but mummy, will you help me look for the largest star? Can we look for Daddy tonight? And that was it. Brought him downstairs. Everybody's staring at him. He went and climbed on one of our friends' knee, sat there and said, can I watch the cartoons now? And that was his way. I left the room, was violently sick, I can remember. But then that was just the start, really. That was the worst thing I'd had to do, but it was the start of lots and lots of other problems that went with Tony's death.
So you talk in the book about being hidden strength. So talk to me more about that. Do you think people all have hidden strength, or were you sort of unique in some way?
No, I don't think I'm unique. I think we all have it. I think somewhere within us. I mean, if somebody had said to me a day before, you're going to have to deal with this, and you're going to have to deal with lots of problems now. You're going to have, you will have to deal with some unreal situations. I'd have said, there's no way I can't possibly do that. I just couldn't have imagined myself doing some of the things I later had to do. But you do, and I think when we talked about the shock and that feeling of not being able to breathe, and gradually, that I think for me, there was a light bulb moment when I was in Spain and I was walking on the beach and just walking, fully clothed. And suddenly I began to be able to breathe again. And I started to talk to my friend and talk about what I was going to do. And up until then, I'd been very silent. I was taking it all in, but didn't really know how to deal with things. And it was as if there was a release inside. And I suddenly knew. I said, I have to, I'll go home, I'll sort the business out, and I'll make sure my main priority is the boys. And that's what I did. And literally, I arrived back at the hotel for my sister-in-law to come running down, saying something terrible has happened. And after I remember thinking, what more could have happened? And she said, they've frozen all your accounts at the offices, the SRA. So it was our firm was a firm of solicitors. My husband was a sole practitioner. Right. And so what I hadn't realised was that because he was a sole practitioner, that the SRA, which regulates solicitors, could go in and literally shut us down because he was gone. And if they'd have intervened, it would have been all sorts of problems. So all our bank accounts were frozen, all sorts of issues. The staff would have all lost their jobs. I probably could have lost the house due to insurance reasons. And there was an awful lot of issues that people don't realise, and I didn't at the time. But I just remember replying to my sister-in-law then, I'll deal with them when I get back. And that's how I was. Suddenly the strength began to get there, and I dealt with one problem at a time. But it is there, and I think there's lots of times you have to do it. I mean, I go on. That's how I start my book. Then I go on to sort of, lots of things that then have to deal with throughout my life, and I do have to. I have to go really out of my comfort zone and deal with things I don't want to deal with. But you do find, no matter how difficult things are, there is always an answer. And I think that is for me, if I go walking or even sitting in the church or sitting on a bench somewhere, that answer will come. So yeah, that's really my story.
So that's interesting. So you've talked quite a lot about comfort zones, and which is often described as a sort of fear, isn't it? So how do you get the energy? How do you get the strength to sort of say, well, I'm going to face that fear and conquer it?
Do you know? I don't actually know. Other than just it just naturally comes. And as I say, it probably is when you least expect it. When you do. Just sit quietly, or walk on the beach, or walk in the garden. I just think it's a time when the panic sort of, for me, the panic leaves my body, and I start thinking more rationally. The rational ideas come into my head, it's just to say, I with everybody there is always an answer. And I know lots of people think, I couldn't deal with that, but I think, deep down there is, within us all there is that strength to do it.
And it's interesting. I mean, you keep mentioning this idea that you go for walks, and this idea of exercise, actually helping your brain to reduce the amount of negative energy in your body is really important, isn't it? Because it does sort of cleanse the emotional side of it.
I think they actually call it mindfulness now. It wasn't a name for it years ago, and now it's what people are told to do. Is to go walking and to and just think. It's just quietly think things through yourself, because I think the bad side of that is I have become a little bit of a control freak, and my new partner actually says I never tell him when I have a problem or if there's something wrong. I actually go off and think about it myself and deal with it. And I think that's probably a bad side effect from having to deal with things I didn't want to deal with. I find it now difficult to sort of I feel the need to actually sort things out myself, whatever it is now. So I think that's probably a bad side of it.
Well, it's not a bad side. It's just a side, isn't it? It's just a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting, isn't it? So what you're saying is you found your own inner strength, but you said it was there anyway. And actually you're implying that actually most people have this, but it's completely untested.
That's right. You don't know you have it. It's tested until something awful happens, and that's when you find it. And and as I say now, there are lots of not so much therapists, but there are lots of coaches and people and mindfulness people that actually talk you through these things to try and help you find that inner strength to deal with things. And that's what I actually feel quite. It actually reassures me that what I did, I was doing the right things anyway, even though there was no one there telling me what to do.
And it's interesting because a lot of people. It's interesting what you just said about your current partner, but what you seemed to do at the time was you reached out for support, and that idea of reaching out for support, asking other people for help. It's making yourself vulnerable in a way is actually where the beginning of strength can come from, isn't it? Because it makes you open.
I think that first day, when I phoned, I needed to tell people what had happened. So I needed everyone to know. But deep down, I knew very quickly that it was only me that could deal with everything. It was only me that could tell all of that. It was only me that could deal with the issues at the office. There was nobody else physically there to do it. So it became... And I think that's when I started to breathe again. Up until then, I was letting people just make decisions for me for several hours and whatever. And suddenly it was, no, I can do this now. And this is what I'm going to do.
So there's an interesting balance, isn't there, between getting help and support from other people, but also being polluted by other people and their needs and their emotional drama almost, and genuine grief and such like. And it's how you manage that balance as part of the challenge here, isn't it?
It is a challenge. I mean, there's certain issues like, as I say, my 15-year-old son had been due to go away the following day to Spain. As it was, of course, he didn't. But then I said to him, do you want to come with me? It's the only chance, if you want to see Daddy again, it's the only chance you will get. Would you like to come with me? It's entirely up to you. And I know quite a few of my friends said, "Oh, but he's too young. He's only 15. How will he cope?" And well, there's no easy way. And I said it has to be his decision of whether he wants to come. But I gave him that decision, and he did come, and he did great. That evening he grew up overnight, but he also wanted to. He also wanted to be there for me. Really, it was a little bit of a role reversal at times. For instance, my sons both were dyslexic. I mean, they're incredibly bright, and they both shone. But at the time, I can always remember thinking I'd always wanted my sons to read, and so I can remember being on the aeroplane with Anthony at 15, and he was deep in a book and reading away. And I'd lost all my concentration, and I was like, "Why is he reading now? I don't want him to read." And I sort of said, and he just looked at me and said, "Mummy, it's we can't change this situation. I know we're both really sad, but we can't change it. And I can promise you, I'm not going to turn into a delinquent overnight. But we're going to have to just deal with it." And he burst the bubble and said to the air hostess, "Please, can you get my mother a glass of wine?" And it was suddenly I was like, he's grown up. And he was incredible, and he was an absolute, and he still is now. Both of my boys I'm extremely proud of, and I think that is the other reason why I'm writing why I did the book and told my story, because the boys have been tremendous, and they are my biggest achievement to date. They are, seeing them grow into these lovely young men. They've never made any excuses for losing their father. We talk about him all the time, and but I've always said it's not an excuse. This is a really awful thing that's happened to us all. But and we did. We all were. In fact, we instead of, some families can fall apart, we didn't. We drew together, and we are fine, which is all I ever wanted, and I'm very, very grateful for.
It's interesting. So. It's interesting. I wrote down when we were chatting. It's fascinating how we very rarely think about the whole post-death thing, don't we? And there's two things sort of occur to me. One, which is I know when I lost someone recently, the help you need is not at the time of the funeral. It's sort of much later, isn't it? When sort of people all vanish, everyone's very concerned about that time, but you're already fully engaged with the process. It's sort of months later when things start to strike you and anniversaries start to happen and the echoes start to roll down through the ages. Sometimes you need a different sort of strength for that, I wonder.
I think for me that was very difficult, and in fact I did become a different person quite quickly because I had to throw myself into the office. Thankfully, the SRA allowed me to continue running the office until I found a buyer, but it did mean that I was away from home a lot. And as I said at the beginning, that's where it was great having my mum here, and she was based here, so. She did an awful lot, but they lost me overnight. I'd always worked, but I always worked school hours, I ran the office. I did all the management, the accounts, but I was always there at school time. So, and I felt very much they lost mum and dad for a while because I was there. I had to throw my effort in, but in some ways, I can say it that I actually was quite happy being away from the home at times because I could forget. When I came home, I suddenly realised the grief would suddenly engulf me again, especially when the boys were not there. When the boys were there, I was always I tried to be cheerful all the time, especially for Oliver. But when perhaps when they stayed at friends or whatever, they were the evenings where I'd probably just huddle up in a ball and disintegrate into tears when nobody could see me. And that was probably the months later, as you say, when people have all gone back to their own lives and you're the one left. This is still the situation.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And really, it's quite peculiar, isn't it? Because there's only one way to deal with it, and you just have to go through it.
Yes,
I mean, they talk about grief being a process, and it really is true, isn't it? I mean, and people underestimate the fact that everybody goes through it at their own speed. You can't suddenly speed up or slow down. It's not about getting your grip. It's not about pulling yourself together. It is just literally how long that process takes.
Absolutely. And, I think for my boys, they've both spoken about it to me since. I mean, we always, as I say, I always kept Tony alive in the house. We always talked about him a lot, and always always in funny ways. Sometimes some of the funny things he did, not always, didn't make him into some brilliant saint. It was always some of the funny things we did together. And the other thing I did, I actually had a cup made that where he actually died. This competition is run every 3 years by the Law Society, and in fact, only last week I was out there with one of my sons presenting the cup for this particular event again. So
wow.
I've kept the memory ongoing. But I think the boys say from their point of view, Anthony, the older one, Anthony always says that he was about to change schools anyway. He made new friends. He was just about to start a job, and the grief didn't hit him. It didn't sort of wipe him out then, but it's been these years since when he graduated. Birthdays, Christmas, all those times, and he talks about grief dripping in. He always finds it drips in around him. It's always there at those times. And my younger son, he was a real daddy's boy, and I think it's been interesting. I mentioned the book again, but he actually is really he's actually away travelling at the moment before he starts his job, and he actually took the book with him, and he keeps messaging me and saying, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that, and I don't remember that. And for him, he said it's quite nice because it's as if it happened to somebody else, but it actually happened to him. And he's now starting to understand things a little bit better, things he was protected from. So yeah, it's been quite an interesting journey.
And so why the book?
Why the book? Well, because I was asked to do it. As I say, I was asked to do it, and I thought, well, if it can help somebody else, then certainly my experience is they can draw from it, draw some strength from it. It's worth it. And as I say, all the proceeds from the book are actually going to charity anyway, which I'm setting up myself to help young people that are dealing with and coping with bereavement. So hopefully it will do some good. So yes, and I think it's been good for me because I probably didn't grieve properly at the time. I was too busy getting on with things, and I think actually writing this book, it took me a couple of months to do it because it was all there. I didn't have to, but it opened a lot of boxes I'd probably closed. And yeah, I think I probably feel a lot better for doing it myself.
That's interesting, isn't it? So it's a lot of people talk about writing being cathartic, don't they? And sort of journaling and such like. Again, we used to call it mindfulness for something. Now we call it journaling, but it is a thing to be able to write things down and to be able to face and remember things and to be able to sort of see it as a testament in a way.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And strangely enough, on the same sort of within a month of me being asked to do it, I was also asked to be part of another book, which is Women of Spirit, ordinary women, extraordinary lives. And they asked if they could put me in as a chapter, and I was really quite, this has happened to me, but I don't find it that, extraordinary. It's what you do. You survive. Think bad things happen to people all the time, and but you just get on with it. But obviously it was, when I look at it now, it probably was, everything was quite bad. But I feel, life now is great, and I do have an awful lot to be thankful for, and I think that's the main reason of doing the book, and hopefully other people will see that.
Brilliant. Well, I think hearing inspirational stories is brilliant, because actually I think we all get strength. It's like many thousands of years ago when we used to sit around the campfire and hear other people's story. I think we can all use it as part of our own memory, but also part of our knowing that we can survive as well. A bit like your mum was able to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And and you've also already alluded to the fact that you sound as if eventually you found somebody else, and so that's yes, lovely, isn't it? Having love again in your life is a lovely thing.
Absolutely. And what was so lovely really about that was that he was a real help to Oliver. It was a couple of years later, Oliver was struggling really. He was missing having a male around, and he sort of chose my partner Phil, because Phil he's an underwater scuba diver, and he films underwater. That's the part of the job he enjoys. He does other things as well, but and my son was just completely, he gave him a shark's tooth and told him all about diving and underwater things. And it sort of brought the spark back into my son's eyes. And, by the age of 10, he was one of the youngest advanced scuba divers in the world. He got a Blue Peter badge for it. And I think, everything happens for a reason. And certainly Phil was very instrumental in Oliver's recovery, because that's how he used I think that's what he then channeled his energy in, was into diving. And he's, So I think I just have been very lucky the way my life has turned out.
Do you know what? I don't think it's luck. But isn't it lovely to hear about a positive role model? I mean, we men get a bit of a bashing at the moment, but positive role models for children are, as are positive female models. They're all part of the mix.
It is important, and I can remember when Oliver I did take him for some therapy, and it's funny how children think, because the lady the therapist that was talking to him said, I've had a sad time, my doggy has died, and Oliver went, well, are you getting a new one? And she went, well, not quite yet, I'll give it some time. And he sort of said, well, I don't think I want a new daddy. But it was strange. It was his introduction. It was him that wanted me to sort of, suddenly sort of 3 years on, it was him that said, oh, you must, and he was the instigator behind it, really. So, I think it's needed. I think definitely. And I do think, Tony is never replaced, obviously. And as I say, we remember him all the time. But it is nice that Oliver's been able to build up normal relationships with males, which has been very important to him.
Mm. So, Tracey, how do we get hold of this book of yours?
Okay, so it's on Amazon. It's only £7.99, but it all is going. It's on Amazon, or I can be emailed directly, or via my website, which is just my name. But as I say, all the money it is going to actually purchase memory. We're buying memory boxes, which we're sending out to hospices and doctor services, schools. But there are also living memory boxes too, which are being worked on between parents and parents with chronic and terminal illnesses, to actually work with their own children. I just feel it's really important. I did a memory box with Oliver, and it was something that not many people did back then, and you can get them, but people have to pay for them, throughout charity. So I just thought it was a nice thing. I'd written this book and might as well use the money. That is a nice thing to use the money for, to benefit others.
Brilliant. Tracey, I think you've been an inspiration. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think it's quite a story, and thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
You take care.
We hope you found today's podcast useful. If you did, why not subscribe and listen to our other podcasts? We would love it if you could leave us a review. To access our resilience coaching, contact us at info@qedod.com. And finally, if you'd like to download our free resilience ebook, go to qedod.com/free ebook. Thanks for listening.